Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Game of Gymnastics podcast. This week I'm joined by Frank Baines, the Junior European Champion in 2012 and international gymnast for GB and Scotland for over 15 years, including competing at the Commonwealth Games 3 times, and currently a practicing physiotherapist. We'll talk about his journey in the sport, how he's used the negative parts of his career to his advantage, and what you can take away from his journey to learn from his mistakes and his successes. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the Game of Gymnastics podcast. Thank you for coming on. Thank you very much for coming on. So today we've got a very special guest. We've got a ex-gymnast who has competed for Great Britain and Scotland for a combined total of about 15 years and has now studied and is now actively a physiotherapist. And we'll learn a bit about how we got into it and all that sort of stuff. But first off, how are you, Frank?
Yeah, very well, thank you. How about yourself?
Not too bad, thank you very much.
Yeah.
So, first off, I just wanted to say it's a massive honour to have you on here today because I obviously, followed your gymnastics throughout your career. You're very well known for all of your lines, all of the very, very well executed gymnastics. I'll say that much. And it was a pleasure being able to see you actually in person at Birmingham 2022. I wasn't expecting to see you because I'd heard that you'd retired. So we'll learn a little bit more about that as we go through the episode. So just to get started, how did you actually get into gymnastics to start with?
So I was quite a late starter. I didn't start sort of officially until I was just before my 9th birthday. But we had a trampoline in our garden and one of my friends taught me how to do a somersault on it. And I just started doing that and then sort of experimenting and doing it with my eyes closed and stuff. And then my mum and dad were like, oh, we'll take him somewhere where he can learn to do this safely and in a controlled way. And then, just sort of took it on from there. A bit of a late starter, but, just things picked up things quite quickly and progressed relatively quick to making it onto the GB squad. And I guess part and parcel of that is that I was an older gymnast starting, so I guess I had more appreciation of how to learn and whatnot, and a bit more, potentially more motivation and idea of where I wanted to go. But yeah. So
when did you, I guess, start taking it more seriously and realize that you had potential in the sport?
I think I was always like a pretty serious kid when in terms of like the actual training and stuff. I remember being on pommels at the gym club, and I had a really great coach called Arthur Masters who sort of coached me from when I first started until I made it onto the squad. And I was, we were working on pommels, and I just ran down the other end of the gym and did a somersault on floor or something. And he sort of brought me back over and was like, okay, Frank, when we're working on pommels, we work on pommels. We focus on that. And then, we'll go and do floor later on. And from that moment, I was just like, oh, okay, I don't really like being told off. And it wasn't a telling off as such. It was just he had a great way with particularly young children in terms of how, he'd get you on board with the sport of gymnastics, and he certainly got me on board with it. And from then on, I was just, really sort of motivated in my training just to get better. And I like learning new things, physically. And then I guess it was, the NDPs, sort of my first experience of going to a competition, and I'd done pretty well in the majority of competitions that I'd done up until that point. And then it was going there, and I was from the same sort of age group as, Courtney Tulloch. He was always, top of the tree back then. So I think the first NDPs that I did, I ended up coming like 21st or something. And I was like, oh wow, I've got to, 20 other people beat me. I've got to try and get better next year. And I think, year after got a little bit better. I think it was like 21st, then 18th, and then something like 10th, at which point I made the squad, and then, real trajectory change there. But I guess, being exposed to a national competition is a big thing, and seeing what everyone else your age is doing, and yeah, that's probably what really lit a fire under me. But yeah, I always enjoyed learning new skills, and you know, it's a fun sport, just chucking yourself around. I mean, you know yourself, like the rush that you get when you catch a Kovac or something like that for the first time. It's insane. It's yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, definitely. So why don't you talk us through like junior career? What was that like, and what are some of the highlights?
Yeah, so yeah, I made the GB squad at about 12 years old. And when I first got there, it's quite intimidating, isn't it? It's, you go to the National Sports Centre and I didn't know anyone there. A lot of people, I suppose, if you're coming from a big club, you have your teammates there who you've trained with, you at least know someone else there. But my personal coach didn't tend to come to Lilleshall because he had other gymnasts back in Southport. So I come from the same club as Dan Purvis, who you've had on here. And yeah, Dan was like still to this day is a great role model for me. But throughout my gymnastics career, he was just, he was the gymnast that I looked up to. And whenever anyone asked me who's my favorite gymnast, it was always Dan because, he was A, one of the nicest people I've ever met, and B, I could see what he was doing was absolutely incredible. So yeah, I was fortunate enough to learn from him. And then yeah, made it onto the squad at 12. Like I say, it was quite intimidating, but I started working with Sergey, who's an absolutely wonderful coach. I don't know if you've had many people on talking about Sergey, but he is one of the few people that I've ever met who. So the way I describe Sergey best is that he would coach Sam the hardest skill in men's gymnastics. He'd be doing something like a casino or something on bar, and then he'd go and coach a gymnast doing a handstand forwards roll with the same enthusiasm, the same passion for the sport. And again, that's I just instantly warmed to Sergey. He was got a great story of I picked up a pretty significant blood blister on my hand when I was on my first camp, and I remember showing one of the other gymnasts and being like, "Oh, what should I do here?" It's like, "Oh, go show Sergey. He'll probably bite it off." And I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." So I went and showed Sergey, and he literally just grabbed my hand and was like, like bit with his mouth. And in my 12-year-old mind at that point, I remember that he had like blood flowing out of his mouth like a vampire, but it was probably nothing as significant as that. But he went, "Okay, clean out, come pummels." And I was like, just stood there like, oh my God, this guy's just yeah, don't mess about. But yeah, he was a fantastic coach, and he just built me up from there. So sort of progressed really quite quick once I got onto squad, and that was 2007. Oh, 2007, I think. And then I did my first junior European, so I was the youngest member of that team in 2010. So I was alongside Sam Oldham, Max Whitlock, Reese Beckford, and Cameron McKenzie. So I was like 2 or 3 years younger than the majority of the team. And again, it was just a real great opportunity. We competed in Birmingham, so it was home soil, which was nice. And it was really cool to learn from all those gymnasts and have a bit of an experience doing that. And we won that competition, which was awesome. And then sort of 2 years later, with my sort of cohort of gymnasts, the team itself was Courtney Tulloch, Niall Wilson, myself, Jay Thompson, and Bryn Bevan. And we won that as that sort of 5-member team, but there was 5 or 6 other lads there who were training alongside us in the build up to it, that any one of us could have been on that team, and I'm sure any one of us would have won that competition. We were such a good, strong group of juniors, but it just so happened that it was the 5 of us. And again, that was sort of the conclusion of my junior career. After that, I moved up to the seniors. And that was a nice, junior Europeans was sort of the pinnacle of a junior European gymnast's sort of career. So it was really cool to, go out winning team all around and then high bar individually. So it was cool.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's like the biggest achievement you can do as a junior, like especially like considering your team gold, all around gold, and you won high bar. Like you've gotten like every single achievement you could possibly want, really.
Yeah,
I mean, other than if you want to specialize on something else, which I
yeah, he did a pretty good job of sort of cleaning up. I think Jay got gold on pommels and Courtney got gold on rings. I think we we did a good job at that junior Euros. I think as the sort of two previous generations had also done. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So after that, what happened next? Like, what was your transition like into senior gymnastics?
So I moved up. I think at that point I was 17. So I moved up a year earlier than I could have done. And you know, you move up from 8 skills to 10 skills, which that's now no longer the case, is it? But back in when I moved up, transition from junior to senior, it was an 8 skill code for junior gymnastics and then a 10 skill code for seniors. And they had at that time a couple of more exciting skills like rollouts on floor. So sort of adding those into your routines, and it takes a bit of a physical toll. And I think I probably got the formula wrong a little bit. I started chucking in a lot more skills, and it would have probably been a bit more beneficial to just focus on what my strengths were, which is neat and tidy gymnastics, good landings, focus on gradually building up that start value. But yeah, I had sort of a couple of competitions at the beginning of the year and did some good routines on high bar in particular. I think it was. I think I'd added in a few new skills like a squat half straight catcher sort of combination, so that bumped up my start value, and I was sort of performing that pretty nice. I think I picked up a joint gold with Max in the Masters finals at the British. So I was sort of there or thereabouts with regards to the outskirts of making a team, but I didn't make the senior European team that year. I had the opportunity to go to a World Cup with some of my teammates in Slovenia, which was a good experience in itself. I think I made the high bar final there as well. Mucked up a little bit in the final, but it was a great experience in itself. Competing against some of these guys that I've seen on TV, sort of throughout my junior gymnastics career and whatnot, and now sort of being alongside them competing at a senior level was really cool. And then sort of the back end of that year, so it's 2013, I just turned 18. We were trialing for the World Championships. And again, I'd sort of stacked more skills into my routine. So I was really sort of pushing stuff. And particularly on high bar, I was doing a bit more of a difficult routine and then finishing with a double twisting, double straight, which I had competed previously, but I think it was at junior level, and now with this big routine, again, one of a million things could happen. It was just a training day at Little Shore, and I remember it pretty clearly because I was training with Dom Cunningham at the time, and he'd said, I'm going to go for lunch, and I was like, I've just got one more second half to do, and then I'll come along, just wait there 1 second, and got up on the bar, did my second half, and then as I let go from my dismount, I just got lost pretty much immediately. And, you're taught to wrap into a ball just to protect yourself a little bit, I guess. And it just so happened that I got the perfect amount of rotation to land clean on my head on the sort of hard surface matting at Little Shore. And, immediately when you hurt yourself, that something's gone wrong. And I was at that point, I was very concerned that I might not be able to walk again. So I jumped up. I felt, okay, I've got, full control of my legs. And then I was like, oh, okay, I gotta lie back down again. Seen by physio and doc, and it turned out that I had, I had a compression fracture to T1 to T4. So yeah, a fracture of 4 of my vertebrae, which required a significant sort of period fortunately I was just in a sort of trunk and neck brace. If it had been a little bit higher, they might have had to sort of traction my head and neck, which would have required some surgery. So I was very fortunate in that regard. And again, fortunate, full stop. Having learned about this sort of injury throughout the course, it could have been much, much worse. The only thing that's changed for me is that I can't smell. So I think the sort of the trauma that I'd experienced in my head has sort of altered the firing of my olfactory nerve. So I can't really smell, which is a shame in itself when you cook something nice, but it's a blessing and a curse in that if I'm working with patients who've, unfortunately soiled themselves, as some people do, then I can't smell it and I can clean it up slightly nicer. But yeah, that was sort of derailed. My senior first year of being a senior gymnast, and it was a big effort to sort of get back from that. Sort of end to end, it was about 6 months, from when I did the injury until I was sort of back at a level where I was ready to compete. And yeah, that sort of injury, again, like I say, I was physically okay from it, but psychologically it does change things. You become much more aware that the sport that you're doing can have some pretty serious consequences if it goes wrong. Fortunately, I was lucky in that regard, but yeah.
Hey guys, Winston here. I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. If you are, please do leave a like, subscribe, and leave a comment if you can. Also, if you want more gymnastics content from me, you can check out my Instagram at wpowell05 or my TikTok at winstonpowell5. Thank you, and let's get back to the episode. I mean, when you talk about that, it's lucky that it wasn't anything worse, because fracturing your spine can paralyze you, just full stop. But then also getting back in. So go on.
Sorry, I think I'd heard recently that a young German lad had unfortunately paralysed himself. Am I right? Have you heard?
I'm not 100% sure. I haven't heard about
that. I'd heard through the grapevine that something had happened, and it's again, it's really sad when that does happen, and like you said, it can happen. But yeah, sorry, you were saying.
No, yeah, and I was going to say, getting back in 6 months, like you say that it's a long period of time. Yes, it is, but also from a vertebral column fracture, that's a shockingly short amount of time.
Yeah, getting back to sort of high level sports as well. And again, sort of look at it, I had, every resource available that British Gymnastics had at that time to sort of get me back to where I was. But again, it's like I mentioned, the physical side of things, perfect. Psychological side of things are a different story. So obviously in healthcare, we look at, everyone has the biological, psychological and social factors with regards to their health. And yeah, in high level sports, I think you have to consider the psychological side of things just as much as you do the physical. And it's just something that probably wasn't focused on as much when I was competing. I don't know if that's if the tide's changing there for yourselves, but it's a huge part of sports. And you look at particularly golfers who, the minutiae between being, I don't know, first and 20th hugely relies on your psychology and how you approach all the shots and everything and whatnot. And it's yeah,
definitely. I mean, it's multifaceted as well, because you've got just going for any amount, any skills where you could possibly hurt yourself beyond that, and being scared for that. But then also it's trying new skills that are harder, but then it's also going back to that skill that specifically did it, and that can be really, really tough.
Yeah, fortunately, I just dropped my dismount down to doing a double straight full, which is really nice because you can see the floor the whole way around.
Yeah.
Still, every time I did it, until the very last time that I competed it in Birmingham 2022, every time I wound up for my dismount, you always have that voice in the back of your mind that's like, oh, what if this is the time, which is not nice, but it's just something that. Yes, yeah, I guess it builds some resilience there, doesn't it? But
I suppose so.
Just builds your ability to shut off your warning signals from your brain, which may be good, maybe not so good.
Yeah, as you said, there's positives and negatives to it, I suppose. But when you're fracturing T1 to T4, I can't see many positives in that.
Yeah. No, you're you're right. until, like I say, it does come to someone dropping a particularly stinky fart, and you're like, oof, yeah, I'm glad I can't smell that one.
Yeah, sure. So beyond that, what happened after you've gotten back from that injury?
Yeah, so I returned sort of a year afterwards, and we had the Commonwealth Games in 2014. That was in Glasgow, and sort of the year beforehand. So I've got my dad's Scottish, my mum is English, so I had the opportunity to compete for either England or Scotland, and I had two really good friends and teammates sort of throughout my, early senior career and now sort of going onwards into life. Obviously, Dan Purvis, I've mentioned before, I came from the same club as him, but then also Daniel Keatings. Both of them were competing for Team Scotland, and we'd had some discussions, and I'd decided to sort of go along and compete alongside them. So yeah, I sort of changed nationality the year before, and then sort of did the competitions at the start of the year as a the trials for the Commonwealth Games, and was fortunate enough to be selected. And I look back and it's one of the best things I did. Everyone from Team Scotland is just, absolutely wonderful. They're really there to support you, and not just as an athlete, but as a person. And I count myself grateful that I was fortunate enough to compete at 3 separate Commonwealth Games and have, 3 absolutely incredible experiences there. Sort of progressed through that year, competed at the Commonwealth Games. Again, I had some pretty high aspirations for myself there, but looking at it with a bit of hindsight, that's still within a year of doing a pretty significant spinal injury. So again, I was sort of pushing harder skills and whatnot. We picked up a silver medal as part of a team, which again, really proud of. I think that's the first time Team Scotland have done it. Had some great role models there on that team. One of the guys that I'd seen as a young gymnast competing in the senior level, a lad called Adam Cox. Again, I say role model in terms of gymnastics, but also just in terms of people and a life that I look at, and you aspire to that sort of thing. He's got a wonderful life, a wonderful wife, and three wonderful children as well, who are considerably older now than when I met them, which is over 10 years ago. So they'll all be growing up now. But yeah, it was great to spend sort of a condensed period of time with him and learn from him how he approached it, the sport, and then life outside of the sport as well was really nice. But yeah, we picked up a silver medal. I'd made a couple of finals myself, so unfortunately had a bit of a tough go in the finals, but it's all part of the experience. So yeah, had a few falls in the all-round final, and then sort of just consistently coming fourth in the finals that I did do, which was again tough to just miss the podium, but it was it was a great experience and one that I'll look back at. And being part of that sort of multi-sport event was really, really cool as well, sort of sharing our accommodation block with the judo fighters, and just being around the buzz of the city, and then getting to wear a kilt for the closing ceremony was great fun as well.
Yeah. I mean, when you look back at that, you were also only 18 at that point, right?
I think I just turned 19 for that Commonwealth. Yeah, again.
Yeah, like you were still very young, and you're still like really close to medaling in this like massive multi-sport event. So if you look at it that way, like it is just experience, and then you've managed to do 2 more beyond that. So
yeah, definitely. And the experience I took from that sort of came into play in the next one that I did, and then the one afterwards, one of the big ones. And for these multi-sport events, you'll get this advice, Winston. It's don't attack the food hall. You walk in and they've got all the food from all these different countries, and it's just if you're someone like me that lives to eat as opposed to eats to live, you go in there and it's like a kid at Christmas. And I was like, oh my god! And I tried everything, and I remember going in the first couple of days, and I had like 3 full plates, and then they had iron brew like on tap as well, so I was just nailing that. So nutrition wise, probably not the best thing to do, and I think it probably that coinciding with, I think I'd just mucked up like the build up to the competition. I'd just done a little bit too much, too close to the event. So I was just really fatigued. I think they probably both came into play. But again, like I say, the next Commonwealths, I was able to go into that food hall and say, okay, the food looks amazing, but I've got a good solid 2 weeks in the village. I'm going to have a week or so after the competition, chill out, don't get 3 plates of food and, struggle to hold any of your strength stuff and feel heavy on high bar. You'll be okay. But yeah, it was, experience that I could take going forwards, which was really cool. And again, met some friends for life there, which was really nice as well. And, just felt supported top to bottom really by Team Scotland, which was, really lovely.
Brilliant. So what about beyond that and like preparation for Worlds and Rio Olympics, all that sort of stuff?
So after that, did a couple more competitions and I was named reserve for the World Championships in 2014, which was, again, a great experience. So I went out with the team to China for 3 weeks. And that was really, really cool getting to see, the ins and outs at a World Championships and how it operates. And it just sort of, fueled the fire to go forward next year and, progress and hopefully make a World Championships in my own right as opposed to being the reserve. So the year after, didn't quite make the European team, but I was named for the European Games that happened in the summer. And I was doing really well in the build up to that. I felt really confident in the gymnastics that I was doing, particularly on floor. I remember just being, feeling super ready. And that for me was probably one of the pieces where I felt like I used to get quite nervous for competitions and I was able to use that nervous energy, that adrenaline in a good way for floor. Whereas other pieces like pommels, I really struggled with that. But yeah, I remember feeling very ready for this competition.
Yeah.
Flown out to Baku and how long ago was it? It was 2 days before the competition. We were sort of going through our routines in one of the training gyms and gone through all the pieces. High bar's my last one. I did a Kovac, caught it, and my guard just locked on the bar. So as soon as I caught it, I've swung around the bar, hand stayed in one place. Now, fortunately, 3 things happened. 1, the guard snapped. 2, I pulled my fingernail clean out the socket. And 3, I tore the extensor tendon in my wrist. And if one of those 3 things, I guess, hadn't happened, I would have, those injuries, you typically fracture radius and ulnar in your forearm, and that would have been really horrid. So again, I say I was fortunate. Pulling out my fingernail was one of the worst experiences I've had, purely because of the sort of aftermath of it as well. So I was sat there and I remember just being on the floor and I'm very aware of what's just happened. And I looked down at my arm and I was fully expecting it to be broken in half because I had a lot of pain in my arm. And I was like, bloody hell, that's straight. And I looked down and I was like, shit, there's a load of blood coming out. Where's that coming from? And I looked on the floor and my guard was there. And then there's this little sort of a fingernail next to it. And I was like, what the heck? I turned over my hand and I was like, whoa, just dripping with blood out of my index finger. And I was like, oh, holy hell, that's making me feel a bit woozy. So we collected my guard and my fingernail and everyone in the training gym had just sort of stopped and was looking over at me. And, people from other nationalities coming over like, are you okay? Like everyone knows what that sort of injury means to someone when you wrap around. You're going to have a pretty significant injury there. Anyway, collected all my stuff. I went back to the athletes' village. My hand and wrist is just exploding at this point. It's puffed up loads. I get back to the village and I was talking to the doc, and he was like, "So we're probably going to have to put the fingernail back on because it needs a template for the new one to grow." And I was like, "All right, sweet." And he was like, "Do you want some anesthetic? Do you want some numbing agent in your finger?" And I was like, I don't really like needles. And I was like, I can probably just deal with you putting it back on. What he didn't explain was that he'd have to clean out the sort of nail bed, and that's just loose nerve endings. So he and like some, like alcoholic rub or something, and he scraped my nail bed, and it goes through me thinking about it. It was a horrid pain. And I remember like joking around with him, like I had like one of those tongue depressors, the wooden ones, and I was like, I'll put this in my mouth, as they used to do when they'd have their like leg sawn off or something. And as soon as he touched that nail bed, I was like, oh my God. But he put that nail back on. And then 2 days later, I competed on floor. And then a day after that, I competed on vault. So we had the scan, saw that there was a grade 2 tear in that extensor tendon, but there's no fractures, nothing like that. And I was sort of discussing with the coaches, and it was sort of implied that, you know, we've flown you out this far, we need you to compete on something, need you to, you know, perform. So I did, in the warm-up gym, much more than I normally would do on floor, but it was sort of, they had wanted to see me do everything that I could do, you know, in my routine. I sort of needed to prove that I could do it in the warm-up before I went out and competed it. So I just like nailed a load of naproxen, paracetamol, whatnot, just to take that pain away. And I remember just being in a lot of pain regardless. I remember doing a rollout in my warm-up that I wouldn't normally do, but again, had to just sort of show that I could do it, and just standing up and being like, wow, I really hurt. And I had, at that time, I think my only non-acro skill was just a wide arm lift. So fortunately, my wrist wasn't necessarily compressed too much. It was in a more sort of neutral position. But I remember going out to do this competition. And again, like I said earlier, floor was one of the pieces where I was much more confident, and I had a really good routine at that point. And I was stood there in front of the judges, and they knew what had happened. And I remember one of the judges looking at me and just going, "Are you okay to compete?" And I was like, yeah. And again, it's just, you know, I felt under pressure to compete. At the end of the day, I did have the ultimate decision, but I went and did it. I just missed out on the final, actually. I think it was only 6 people for the final at this competition, which was a bit odd. It was a bit odd competition, full stop. It was the first time they'd done this, but they only took 6 people into the final. I think I finished 7th, and I had quite a big step on my dismount, which was, again, I look back at it and I'm like, oh, I really wish I'd made the final. But again, I look back at it and I think, bloody hell, I was in a lot of pain, and if I'd made the final, I probably would have really regretted it in a sense. But then the day after, I did 2.5 twisting CAS on vault, which was, again, a fair amount of force through my wrist. So, you know, that was just a tough experience. But again, it is what it is, and you can learn some things from it, a bit of resilience, I guess. But
if you're like me, you struggle with rips on your hands, seemingly at the worst possible times, like in a competition prep, for example. I'm proud to partner with Wad & Dunn, who have a solution for us gymnasts to help us train and protect our hands in the process. I especially recommend their rip guards for apparatus using grips or guards, whatever you want to call them, high bar, rings or A-bars, and their 3-step hand care kit to make sure your halluces are strong and rip resistant without making them soft. Use my code PAL at checkout or my link in the description for 10% off at checkout. Now, back to the episode. Yeah, I mean, there's not much else you can do. Like, it's done, whatever. But also at the same time, it's like, sometimes you look back at things like, how did I actually do that?
Yeah.
When you're in the moment, it's like, yeah, it's fine. It's whatever. Like, I'll get through it. But when you look back, it's like, you think about how much pain you were in, think about the actual injury that you had, and it's like, doesn't really...
Yeah, definitely. And I think how I managed it and how I managed a lot of my injuries back when I was training was just, and it's not a responsible way of doing it, was just, you know, taking far too many non-steroidal drugs, which, your ibuprofen, diclofenac, naproxen, the like. And again, I look back at it and... I did just overdo it massively because I was in quite a bit of pain when I was competing and training, and then, you know, was just taking them. And it got to a point where I remember one of my friends, Dan Keatons, he had taken a lot of them, and he just coincidentally said, you know, you can get some pretty serious kidney and stomach damage from taking these too much. And I just had no idea at that time. Again, they had it on the package instructions, but I didn't read them. Yeah. I was given them, and I knew that they made me feel less pain when I trained in this pretty intense sport. And I was just like, all right, I'm going to keep on taking them. And when I learned a bit about them, then I changed how I was taking them, and I started using them less and putting up with the pain a bit more and taking care of my body in other ways, and, doing other recovery strategies. And so I did my dissertation on sort of athletes' understanding and beliefs regarding non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. And I found, similar to myself, the education there for the athletes probably just still not there at this level. That, again, the athlete is going to make that ultimate decision themselves, but they should be equipped with all the tools to make an informed decision. I think certainly myself, when I was younger, that wasn't the case, partly due to ignorance myself. But I think it's probably worthwhile having some education there for the current athletes now. And again, I know it's not just gymnastics that is affected by this. The use of non-steroidals is pretty common in every Olympic sport, but B, football, rugby, park run is a big one. People rock up at the start line of a 5K on a Saturday morning and pop several ibuprofen and paracetamol just to get through it. But yeah, it's something that I'm pretty keen to help educate people on. And again, we'll hopefully do a bit more of that in the future.
Cool. So if someone came to you and is doing what you did back then, what would you say to them?
Yeah, good question. I think it's the most important thing is educating someone on it. So, fielding questions just to get their level of understanding of, do you know what the side effects of these medications are? And in particular, when we're thinking non-steroidals, we're looking at, the damage to the stomach and damage to kidneys, particularly if you're dehydrated when you're taking them. And then on top of that, when you discuss with particularly an athlete, the fact that when they have an injury, if they're taking these non-steroidals, what we're looking at is allowing the inflammatory process to get to its peak. And with that peak, there is evidence that you'll have better muscle healing in future. So if we're not actually letting the inflammatory process get to that peak because we're blocking the prostaglandins that allow that inflammatory cascade, then you're not going to have as good quality muscles, tendons, bone healing after that injury. So, managing pain and inflammation with healthier methods, whether that be, and again, different things are going to work for different people. Some people really like compression stuff. Some people really like ice, heat, contrast bathing, those types of things. And it's working with the individual. And again, I did a lot of research, leading up to my dissertation into, the side effects and everything. So, if the athlete isn't aware of what's going on with the side effects there, we can guide them to, some of the evidence. And, again, you're not wanting to fearmonger. And it's, for me, I'm sort of looking at it from both sides of the story, because, if someone had said to me, you've got all this information about how harmful it could be, but you've got the opportunity to compete at this competition, and if it's the Olympic Games, if we take away that pain, then you've got the opportunity to perform at your best. It's seeing it from both sides of the coin, and it's one of the things that I'm pretty passionate about is you have a career as an athlete, particularly as a gymnast, that maybe would last up on average till you're 30 odd, and then you have on average sort of 50 odd years of life after that, and it's thinking of your longevity as opposed to the here and now, and just taking both sides of the coin into consideration. And it's again, I'm not in that sort of field at the moment, but having seen how other sports and whatnot would still use those non-steroidals pretty regularly and pretty readily, then I'm aware that it's still a pretty serious concern for a lot of sports.
Yeah. Do you think that it helps having competed at such a high level in gymnastics, being able to see it from both sides, being able to see it from their perspective, like, I just need to get through this competition, like, and then I'll be all right. But then also being able to see it from a physio's perspective as well.
Yeah, I think it definitely does, and I think particularly when we're talking about gymnastics, I think I it certainly helps build that rapport with gymnasts that I see, because they're aware that I have a sort of fundamental understanding of what it feels like, and how painful it can be, I guess. Um, so I think, I think it has certainly helped in that regard. And again, probably having been removed from the sport for a few years and having experienced a life where I can sort of say to people, yeah, okay, gymnastics is, when you're competing, you identify solely as a gymnast, or at least that's how I identified. And I remember going to family events, and all my mum and dad's friends would they simply say to me, "Oh, you're the gymnast," and it's reinforced throughout your childhood that that is what you are, that is who you are. And I think it's important to remind athletes that they're not just an athlete; they're more than that. They have a unique personality, a unique life outside of that, and it's something that I probably didn't come to appreciate until I had actually finished the sport, and then I was identifying as a physio student, and then I was like, oh, okay, no, that's not who I am. That's just something that I do, and is one sort of facet of my being. So yeah, I think having that sort of approach to it, and if I'm discussing taking a bit of time off from doing a particularly painful piece of equipment, whatever it is for the athlete, and sort of looking at timeframes. I think when you're wrapped up in the sport, then you're only focused on, I've got to be ready for this, and I've got to be ready now. But you can sort of look at it and say, okay, well, if we push that rehab, then we might break down, or blah blah blah. I think it has helped me, but again, we'll see.
Yeah.
Again, like I say, I'm not necessarily in that sort of field at the moment, but I have worked with gymnasts, and still occasionally, will help give a bit of advice and stuff.
Do you think that in that regard, there's a psychological component to it? Because you've got the component in terms of like thinking that this is the only competition this is the only thing that matters to me right now, and I am just solely a gymnast, like that sort of side of thinking. But also in terms of always chasing the next competition and not keeping the bigger picture in mind.
Yeah, certainly. And again, this might not necessarily be how everyone operates, but certainly for me, it was looking at the next competition. But yeah, again, like I mentioned before, sort of three really important factors with regards to sort of medicine and physiotherapy is, the biological factors regarding injury, health, whatever, the psychological factors, and then the social factors. So when we're looking at, how they interact, they're all going to influence each other. So you get an injury, you feel down because, I'm not able to do the thing that I love. I'm not able to hang around socially with the people that I, identify with, and they're a huge part of my friendship group, and then that makes you feel worse, and then feeling worse psychologically has been evidence to sort of slow biological healing, and so it's they're all interacting together. And again, as a physio, it's not my role to be there solely to support someone psychologically, but it's my role to identify that. So I think particularly with regards to when I was training and competing, there were probably some significant psychological factors that you can pick up on and sort of direct to, the responsible professions who are able to deal with that. So I know, have you had Sam on the podcast?
Yeah, right at the start.
Yeah, he's got a pretty good story of where someone had just done a pretty, standard questionnaire with him and sort of directed him to help that he required at the time. And, it's something as an athlete, you probably just block out, particularly in a sport like gymnastics where you just have to, well, any sport where you just have to focus on um, competing and being the best. I think mental health is probably not the thing that's considered the most important factor in the athlete's world, but I think it's a huge part in terms of A, being injury free, and B, performance as well. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's something that we need to like sort of always be aware of is one of the biggest thing, rather than having to like always have it in the forefront of the mind. It's like just always having some sort of,
you want a proactive approach as opposed to a reactive approach.
Yeah.
And again,
yeah, definitely. So I sort of like, well, we sort of like cut off like midway through the story. So beyond that, I guess guard lock wrist injury.
Yeah. So ended up making a bit of a return to the sport after that wrist injury. It took me, 2 months of fairly intensive rehab to get back, and I was doing a trial for the World Championships that year. I was the second reserve for that team, so not travelling reserve, which was a bit of a shame. But again, it was really great to see my teammate James Hall get that opportunity to go to the World Championships. And yeah, team came second, which was really good to see. That's the year before the Olympic Games. So yeah, just again, Dan Purvis on that team, all the other lads there, just my training partners, and I was just super proud of them. And then going into that Olympic year, into 2016, I guess I was sort of aware that I probably wouldn't be chosen purely because I didn't have any experience on that World Championship level. But I was determined to give it my all. I had a really good sort of positive training camp to start off the year. We started in Portugal and then flew out to Brazil, which was a really cool experience, getting to go onto Copacabana Beach and whatnot. And at the end of that camp, I picked up a pretty significant ankle injury. So the year before, I'd done a 3-2 tear of the deltoid ligaments in my ankle. So they're a sort of ligament complex on the inside of your ankle. Now, when you have ankle injuries, it's much more common to do that outside ligament complex, just because of sort of the anatomy and the range available at the foot. But I had done that one on, it was either left or right, I can't remember which one I did first. But then in that training camp, I took off for a triple twist at the end of my floor routine and rolled my ankle on takeoff and then on landing, and did the deltoid ligament on the other ankle. So yeah, I remember during our first year of lectures at university, we were sort of learning about the ankle joint, and they were saying, has anyone ever had an ankle injury? And I was like, yeah, I've done my deltoid ligaments on both sides. And they were like, are you sure it wasn't the lateral ankle ligaments? And I was like, no, it was the ones on the inside. And they were like, that's really, really uncommon. And I was like, that's gymnastics for you. Yeah. It's uncommon.
Yeah. Did that happen a lot? Like when they were asking for like, oh, who's had this injury? You just always had your hand up. Yeah.
Yeah. Very much so. And again, that was something that I think probably definitely benefited me in that a lot of these injuries I can relate to. I can sort of say, oh, okay, yeah, I've had that. I know what it feels like, or I know someone who has had that, and I've seen plenty of people with these things. So fortunately, touch wood, I never really injured my knees, but I've seen plenty of people, Johnny, Ashley, Clay Stevens, do their ACLs, and and currently Liam Jury as well, and you can see the impact that injury has. So whereas I haven't had that injury myself, I can see how it impacts someone and the amount of time it would take them to recover, and the emotional impact, the physical impact. Yeah, it's a big injury, but it certainly helped me. But yeah, when we were going through all the injuries, I was like, oh yeah, I've had like 90% of these.
Yeah. It's either you've had them or you know someone who's had them.
Yeah. So yeah, I had that ankle injury, and then I had a bit of a pre-existing shoulder injury that really flared up then as well. So I participated in the Olympic trials just on three pieces, just did P-bar, high bar, and pommels, but with little expectation of making the team. And it sort of just used the rest of that year to get injury free, which was really nice to have that sort of extended period where I'm not thinking, all right, I've got to get ready for this. I can actually take a bit of time to get my body fit and healthy again, which was really nice. And then the next year after that, it's a new Olympic cycle, and I made my first sort of senior major championship. So I competed at the European Championships out in Cluj-Napoca with the rest of the GB team, and I was competing on floor, pommel, and P bars. So again, putting in some pretty big start values in the majority of them, and I was sort of in and around like top 15 to top 10 on those pieces. So I think I was like second reserve for P bars. So yeah, good start to the year. Unfortunately, ended up just picking up another injury at the back end of that year. I'd done a swing double back on P bars and just caught and went down really low and had a fracture to my first rib and sort of bruising to the cartilage along there, which was just really unpleasant, and took me a while to get recovered from. Which leads into the next year. I'd sort of had a slow start to the year because of this injury, and I was competing routines that were a little bit lower. But again, sort of similar to how I'd mentioned before, my sort of super strengths in that sense were the ability to do really clean neat gymnastics, not necessarily a higher start value maybe, but have minimal deductions. And that's sort of what I did at the start of that year, and leading into the Commonwealth Games in the Gold Coast. Sort of, again, it was a similar sort of story where I was finishing fourth on the majority of the apparatus that I did in the all-round. Picked up a bronze in the team competition, which was fantastic. And a bit of a comeback story there as well, which was really nice. And then I'd managed to pick up an individual bronze on P-bars as well. So that was a nice way to cap off that competition. And then with regards to sort of going onwards from there, I'd sort of built on that throughout the summer. I was competing, internationally with the team, and unfortunately I was named the first reserve for the European team, and sort of had participated in all of the camps and everything in the build up to it, and I think there was a bit of a decision as to whether or not to put me on the team, and ultimately it didn't go my way in the end, which was a real shame. But it kind of just, it was a bit of a demotivating factor in that, I'd been sort of first reserve for a lot of these things in the past, but at this point I sort of felt like I'd earned my spot on the team. And after that, it kind of just, it was demotivating in the sense that I just felt like no matter what I did, I would never make that sort of, that ultimate world championship Olympic team that I wanted to make, which is, it's tough. And again, it comes back to that those psychological factors, which I just found it very difficult to train through. And then, picking up little injuries that just, become more difficult to deal with and whatnot. So, I ended up retiring at the end of 2019, so the year after. I'd done a few competitions. I'd actually changed club over to Pegasus. Dan Purvis had retired at that point, and I just found it very difficult to keep on training without a training partner there who I could sort of bounce off in and just motivate me on those tough days in particular. So I moved down to Pegasus to train with Courtney and James, which was wonderful, and competed at a World Cup in that time and picked up a gold on P-bars, silver on high bar. So I was sort of still doing some really high level gymnastics, but it just, it became increasingly more challenging for me to, train, compete, knowing that I wouldn't be, ultimately able to make that team. And I think, I just got to a point where I wasn't happy and I didn't enjoy the sport and I no longer wanted to do it. So yeah, finished at that point, which was, it's you'll experience it one day. Finishing gymnastics is is a journey in itself. I certainly at the time didn't know what I wanted to do, and yeah, it took me a little while before I actually knew what road I sort of wanted to go down. So I had a bit of time out from everything. Went traveling away in East Asia for a few months, and then COVID cut it short, which was a shame because I love that sort. Got a photo that Jay Thompson took from Vietnam up behind me, so it's a pretty spectacular country, and that part of the world is it's beautiful. But yeah, it took me about a year or so where I was just no idea what I really wanted to do, and then I'd sort of toyed around with the idea of studying physiotherapy in the past because of all these injuries that I'd picked up, and I applied to various different universities, and University of Nottingham stuck out as one because they sort of had this real appreciation for student athletes. So I applied there under the guise that I was at this point training for the Commonwealth Games in 2022. This was sort of early 2020 that I'd done this. Late 2020 that I'd done this. And when I'd applied, I got a call off the sports recruitment guy from UON, and he I picked up the phone and he was, "Oh, I hear you're really interested in coming and studying physio at Nottingham, and you're also you're looking forward to competing at the Commonwealth Games, and we'd love to have you here." And I was just like, at this point, hadn't trained for a year or so, and I was like, "Yep, that's the plan." I sort of had it in the back burner of my mind, but this, motivated me to actually pick up my handguards again, get back in the gym, which was for me one of the best things that I could have done in terms of, when I left the sport back in 2019, I had some really unpleasant, not fond memories of it, and I hated the sport, for want of a better word. And getting back into it, I had a really, really enjoyable time. I started training back at Southport again. Jeff, my old coach, came in to help me. He was much more calm, much more laid back about it this time around, which was really nice. And then moved to Nottingham, where when I started studying. Got to reunite with one of my old training partners, Josh Champion. He's running the men's program at Nottingham now. But at the time, Sergey was again coaching at Nottingham. So for the sort of concluding year of my career, I trained alongside Sergey. And again, I've mentioned how great he is. And, he saw where I was at my point in career. And, he's not going to get me to come in 6 days a week, train 8 hours a day. He saw that I was balancing university and gymnastics. And some days I'd come in and I'd be there for an hour, and he'd get me to do this, that, and the other, see where I was at, and just say, "All right, we'll do that tomorrow." And he was just a great man manager, which was exactly what I needed at that point in my career. And then again, had the opportunity to compete at one more Commonwealth Games alongside, some of my best pals. Hamish, we competed in 2018 together. David Weir, we had Cami Lynn, new face on the team, and Pavel as well, first time round. And it was just a really lovely experience with, again, all the people from Team Scotland, Jamie Barry and Sam Hendrickson, who just made that place such a welcoming environment. So yeah, after I finished the sport, I look back at it and I've got much more fond memories, but now no longer identify as a gymnast, which is a different part of life and something that you'll come to appreciate at some point as well, Winston.
Yeah, I can only assume it's like a massive shift because when you've identified as a gymnast, like you said, that was all you identified as. One that's like sort of taken away. What sort of happened? Yeah.
Again, I think probably the best way to describe it, and probably you'll find this talking to people who've actually gone through that process. I didn't have anything in place at that point, so I just felt a bit lost. I just felt, this is something that I've done my entire life, and It's not necessarily a sport like football where you make millions and millions of pounds, and when you retire, you don't necessarily have to work again. You make pennies in gymnastics, and obviously after that, I have to then work for however many years, and I count myself fortunate in the fact that I had all the injuries purely because it gave me the opportunity to hang out with physiotherapy staff. And you've got some wonderful, the physios who I mainly sort of worked with and looked up to were Ali Little, Nathan Ring, and Johnny Buck. And Johnny was really helpful in my application to university, and has been happy for me to ask him about things throughout my university career. And yeah, they're all really good guys. But yeah, I count myself lucky that every cloud has a silver lining, and having all those injuries allowed me to pick up an interest in physiotherapy. And that's something that when I started it, I was really apprehensive going to university, and I don't think that's an unusual thing. You go in, you're committing to a new sort of, ultimately a new way of life at that point. If once you graduate, you're then going to go into that job and do that until the day you die potentially. And yeah, I remember being really, really nervous. And on that first week of university, when we started learning about anatomy and whatnot, I was like, okay, yeah, this is awesome. I really enjoy this. And again, I think going into the degree, I thought I'd come out and I'd probably work in gymnastics because that's what I knew. But, you go in and you have these experiences with different patients and different sort of cohorts, and the sort of field I'm working in now is certainly something that I never envisioned myself working in. So I'm you pick up new hobbies and new areas that you enjoy. So yeah, it's scary when you first finish, but you've got plenty of people there who've been there and done that. And I think what you're doing here, where you've got something alongside your career where you're building something, is a really positive thing to see. And again, obviously you've got someone like Niall to look up to who's been there and done that and got something set up alongside his gymnastics that is taking away some of that focus from the sport, because I don't think it's necessarily good to just be unilaterally focused on the sport, but also it's setting up something afterwards. It's giving you ideas of what passions and this, that, and the other could be. And yeah, it's nice to see that people are doing that now.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's taking much focus away from the sport because I am talking about the sport. It's focused away from the training, like actively training and that sort of side of things, which I quite enjoy. And I
experience of engaging with other people, interview techniques. You're getting how to clip and create videos and whatnot. You're getting a repertoire of skills that you're probably not giving yourself credit for, but then you can put on a CV and whatnot and take into further passions in life. It's really to see, Winston.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. So what sort of things do you think gymnastics has taught you that you've now brought into the rest of your life? And as a physio?
Yeah, so probably the most important thing, and I will say this, if someone asks me what do I think is the most important thing gymnastics taught me, it's how to fall and land safely. Because I finished gymnastics and did a lot of climbing, and there have been 3 occasions where I've been to the climbing depot, and this is just bouldering, so falling off maybe maximum 4 or 5 meters ish in height, where people have fallen off and they've landed on a rolled ankle or something, and because they don't understand how to break that fall, break that patterning, roll onto your back safely, they've put all their weight through that rolled ankle and ended up with fracture, dislocation, whatever. And again, the ability to fall off something. I was cutting the hedge the other week and the chair that I was on just lost its footing. I fell backwards and I rolled out of it. I think probably, if you've not done gymnastics, 95% of the population are fracturing a wrist or something in that sort of fall. But, with the ability to fall and land safely, that is a huge thing. And again, so that's sort of physically, I suppose. Another physical thing is just a love for keeping active. And I think if I'm too, sedentary for an extended period of time, then I feel the need to get up, get moving. And that's something that I think is really important. Physical activity guidelines, it's minimalistic. It's sort of 30 minutes of moderate intensity activity 5 times a week, which is very achievable if you're, walking to your workplace or walking, after meals or something. And certainly, gymnastics has just given me that desire to keep physically fit, which is, as we age, that's really important. And then, I mentioned the word resilience. I think it is the resilience when you're in the face of, I don't know, dealing with people who you disagree with, or this, that, and the other. We've all had that coach who shouts at us, and you've just got to put up or shut up, basically. And I think it's given me a fair amount of psychological ability to just crack on with stuff, despite it being tough. I always say, nothing's going to be as hard as waking up at 5 a.m, driving the 2.5 hours to get to Lilleshall, stuck in traffic, and then having to do 2 routines on a Tuesday morning. Me and Dan would do that, pretty regularly. And that some of the most challenging periods in my life, when you've got that second floor routine to do and you're absolutely knackered and you've got to hit the 1:20 sort of finish time to catch your lunch in time. And it's tough, but again, it's given me that sort of resilience to go on through my life, and studies and job. It gives you a fair amount of resilience to deal with a lot of stuff. And then probably, last but not least, is just work ethic. I don't think you're going to make it too far in gymnastics, particularly into a senior career like yourself, if you've not got that work ethic to go in, and particularly on the hard days, just put in a shift. And, things get hard in life and you just have to work through it occasionally.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's what it's taught me. What's it taught you?
Oh, wow. Flipping script. I would say the ability to just sort of like you said, but just sort of get on with it and like find a way to make something work. Because when you're faced with some sort of like something that seems so like insurmountable, but you have to do it, there's no other option. You find a way. You always find a way to get through it. And it's like, having that knowledge is like, well, if I can do that, then what really is there? Like, what can't I do at that point? And
so, like, problem solving abilities, or
I guess so, but it's also like
with that resilience sort of aspect of things.
And kind of but also like there's not many things that you could put in front of someone and say like, you have to do this, and they wouldn't find a way to do it. And like, given that, like, there's always going to be a way forward. There's always going to be something that you can do to sort of like keep pushing forwards. And I think that's one thing that I've sort of learned from the sport. And if one path sort of shuts, then you just find some other way of doing it.
Yeah, that's it. I suppose in terms of like gymnastics wise, there are some things that are just probably physically unattainable for certain body types, whereas other things are, and you build just thinking of an example, Christian Thomas, he was the tallest gymnast I knew, and he physically couldn't hang underneath the bars on P-bars without touching his knees on the floor. So, anything like long swings, mois, tip outs, etc., which are a huge part of, modern day gymnastics, were just, not feasible for Christian and his body type, but he created a routine that just suited him, and he was consistently scoring very highly on P-bars because he'd worked to his strengths. And it's problem solving is a good one, I'd say.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm relatively good at problem solving regardless, and I'm good with numbers, so I can sort of like figure that out regardless. But it's about putting that sort of theory, that solution that you come up with, into practice and actually making it happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We'll go with that. I mean, to be fair, like in terms of just finding a way to like make it happen, the story I often have with that is like me doing my A levels and having two international competition and British teams,
Yeah.
literally in the same time. And that's like one of the biggest things for me. It's like, I'll be honest, looking back, I'm like, that was the most stressful time in my life. I don't know how I actually managed to get through, but I found a way and I managed to do well in my A levels and still go out and compete. So yeah, if I can do that, then what is this?
Yeah.
Why can't I just force myself to get through this?
Yeah, again, it's exactly what I say with the two routines on a Tuesday morning. If I can do that, like it's not that, and it's it's a good way of looking at things. I think,
Yeah, exactly.
having those experiences that not everyone else does gives you the opportunity to, take that. Again, I think it is resilience forwards into whatever activity you're doing or stressed about.
Yeah, 100%. So how do you want, like, just to sort of wrap up, how do you want the gymnastics community to sort of remember you and your journey, and what's one thing that you think that they could take away from it?
Yeah, good question. I think me as an athlete, I was generally, very supportive of everyone, and I just wanted everyone to do their best. My gymnastics, um, good and bad. You can remember me for some pretty nice lines and stuff. Bad, you can remember me for some pretty wacky and awesome falls. So there's one in particular that I'd showed. I don't think Niall had seen this ever until like 2 weeks ago. It was a British Championships back in 2017, and it was on P bars, and I was doing swing double back, and I'd like the week before in a competition in Stuttgart, I'd done my I did a long swing before, and then straight away swing double back. I caught the long swing slightly past handstand, and as I swung down, I was like, okay, sweet, just go for this. And I did it a week later in the British. For whatever reason, I did the long swing, finished past handstand slightly. On the way down, for some reason, I was like, you've caught this too late, do a stutz. So as I let go of the bar, I sort of turned in midair and just hit pretty much everything on my body on the P bars. So yeah, that's probably the wackiest fall that I had on camera. Yeah, I think anyone who saw one in person, yeah, they can tell you that they were all over the place.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, I actually did a pretty similar thing with Stutz recently.
Yeah.
I did one. It was like almost like too high, so
Yeah.
I twisted like too much. This hand caught fine, and the other one I stubbed my fingers, then sort of recoiled, so I brought them back, and then landed on my elbow and my hip on the bar and just dropped off.
Yeah. I hated Stutz. It was, hard skill. No, it's. I guess I had quite a few falls. I broke the P bars one time, split a bar in half, which was pretty funky. I got my revenge on that P bar for sure. But yeah, that's probably it. Just, I had some highs and some lows and a good time in the sport. And like I say, I think looking at what I can do for the sport now, it's probably a bit of education in around, taking non-steroidals when not to take them, certainly, and when not to overdo it. That's probably something that, like I've got a bit of responsibility to help out with if I can. But
yeah, like you talked about sort of what you think people can, about like your career in general and the highs and lows and all that sort of stuff. But what do you think other people can learn from your career? Like what do you think that is something that you've done that people should either avoid or try and emulate?
Yeah. I suppose, like I say, working to whatever your strengths are is probably an important thing. Again, like I say, if someone like Christian was on P bars, he's not going to start dedicating day in, day out to his long swing elements. He's going to figure out ways that work for him. And again, what I think I probably got a bit wrong was, my strengths are my ability to have neat and tidy gymnastics. And I probably should have started not necessarily chucking in every skill that I could have done. I think there was some outside pressure to do that in terms of what my APA desired of me. I had to hit this target score all round. So I had that, weighing down, I need to do this. But again, at the end of the day, does that really matter? If you're, at the end of the day, if you're then scoring much lower all round, does it matter if your start value is higher? Or
it's the finish score that matters.
Yeah. So I think, working to your strengths is an important thing. And then, actually listening to your body is another important thing. I think I got to times where I was definitely burnt out, definitely injuries were brewing, and, just train through it because that's what I have to do. But, rest and recovery are just as important as getting those extra sort of repetitions in at the gym. And maybe it's not necessarily working on, your gymnastics skills, but sort of injury prevention stuff that would be more beneficial for you at that stage. And then last but not least, just how important, being happy and enjoying the sport actually is for, your ability. If you love something, you're just going to perform better at it. It's as simple as that, or that's my belief. If you are approaching something every day with just disdain and not enjoying it, then it sucks. It's a lot harder.
Yeah, true. So, final question. Now that you've experienced the podcast, who do you think would be a good fit to come on?
Oof. Good question. I think Ashley Watson, with regards to injuries and stuff, he's got some really interesting stories there. And I think he was, one of the best gymnasts I've seen all round, and particularly on P bars and high bar. And unfortunately, he had quite a few significant lower limb injuries that compromised that all round competition for him. But he was absolutely incredible to watch and whatnot. He'd be really interesting. And then other than that, the best gymnast I ever saw with my own two eyes was Sergio Sasaki. Do you remember the name?
It's familiar.
Yeah, so he was competing sort of in that, the build-up years to 2016. So I say he's the best gymnast I saw with my own eyes. So the first time I competed with him was in 2009 at a junior competition over in Doha. It was the World School Games, and that year he'd competed at the World Championships, and he was, I think he was 17 at the time, and I was maybe, I would think I'm either 13 or 14. We rocked up and I saw him in the training gym. This is like before the competition. On rings, he warms up double. On high bar, he warmed up triple back. And on P bars, I think he did double front half. And then we get to the competition and his dismounts on those pieces of apparatus. He did a double front half off rings. He did double straight off high bar. And he did what was it? A double pike off P bar. So all the stuff that he was doing in warm up, he just wasn't competing, and I was like, "What the heck is this guy doing?" But he was awesome. I think he won that competition, and he was just head and shoulders above everyone else. But then, like, having seen him at other competitions, his Dragulescu was, for me, when he was competing it, him and Radovilov probably had the best Dragulescus I've ever seen in my life. They just, 9 times out of 10, they're going to stick it. They just knew intuitively where they were, what they needed to do. His work on high bar all around, he was the best gymnast I ever saw. And again, obviously I saw Uchimura compete live and whatnot, but for me, his gymnastics just stood out for one reason or another. And there was some pretty insane stories around him as well. So if you could get him on the podcast, I think he's doing Cirque du Soleil or something now. So he's, and again, a really interesting post-gymnastics career to do. He'd be another one.
Nice. Cool. Well, thank you very much. And thank you for coming on. I do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you all for listening to the Game of Gymnastics podcast. I'll hope to catch you in the next one. Peace.